Chapter 1 of The Dragon and the Raven by G. A. Henty. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Mike Harris. The Dragon and the Raven by G. A. Henty. Chapter 1. A low hut built of turf, roughly thatched with rushes, and standing on the highest spot of some slightly raised ground. It was surrounded by a tangled growth of bushes and low trees, through which a narrow and winding path gave admission to the narrow space on which the hut stood. The ground sloped rapidly. 20 yards from the house the trees ceased, and a rank vegetation of reeds and rushes took the place of the bushes, and the ground became soft and swampy. A little further, pools of stagnant water appeared among the rushes, and the path abruptly stopped at the edge of a stagnant swamp, though the passage could be followed by the eye for some distance among the tall rushes. The hut, in fact, stood on a hummock in the midst of a wide swamp, where the water sometimes deepened into lakes connected by sluggish streams. On the open spaces of water herons stalked near the margin, and great flocks of wildfowl dotted the surface. Other signs of life there were none, although a sharp eye might have detected light threads of smoke curling up here and there from spots where the ground rose somewhat above the general level. These slight elevations, however, were not visible to the eye, for the herbage there grew shorter than on the lower and wetter ground, and the land apparently stretched away for a vast distance in a dead flat, a rush-covered swamp, broken only here and there by patches of bushes and low trees. The little hut was situated in the very heart of the fen country, now drained and cultivated, but in the year 870 untouched by the hand of man, the haunt of wildfowl and human fugitives. At the door of the hut stood a lad some 14 years old. His only garment was a short sleeveless tunic girded in at the waist. His arms and legs were bare, his head was uncovered, and his hair fell in masses on his shoulders. In his hand he held a short spear, and leaning against the wall of the hut close at hand was a bow and quiver of arrows. The lad looked at the sun, which was sinking toward the horizon. "Father is late," he said. "I trust that no harm has come to him in Egbert. He said he'd return today without fail. He said 3 or 4 days, and this is the 4th. It's dull work here alone." "You think so, Wolf, don't you, old fellow? It's worse for you than it is for me, pent up on this hummock of ground with scarce room to stretch your limbs." A great wolfhound, who was lying with his head between his paws by the embers of a fire in the centre of the hut, raised his head on being addressed, and uttered a low howl, indicative of his agreement with his master's opinion and his disgust at his present place of abode. "Never mind, old fellow," the boy continued, "we shan't be here long, I hope, and then you shall go with me in the woods again and hunt the wolves to your heart's content." The great hound gave a lazy wag of his tail. "And now, Wolf, I must go. You lie here and guard the hut while I am away, not that you are likely to have any strangers to call in my absence." The dog rose and stretched himself, and followed his master down the path until it terminated at the edge of the water. Here he gave a low whimper as the lad stepped in and waded through the water. Then, turning, the dog walked back to the hut and threw himself down at the door. The boy proceeded for some 30 or 40 yards through the water, then paused and pushed aside the wall of rushes which bordered the passage, and pulled out a boat which was floating among them. It was constructed of osier rods, neatly woven together into a sort of basket work, and covered with an untanned hide, with the hairy side in. It was nearly oval in shape, and resembled a great bowl, some 3½ feet wide and a foot longer. A broad paddle with a long handle lay in it, and the boy, getting into it and standing erect in the middle, paddled down the strip of water, which 100 yards further opened out into a broad half a mile long and 400 or 500 yards wide. Beyond moving slowly away as the coracle approached them, the waterfowl paid but little heed to its appearance. The boy paddled to the end of the broad, whence a passage, through which flowed a stream so sluggish that its current could scarcely be detected, led into the next sheet of water. Across the entrance to this passage floated some bundles of light rushes. These the boy drew out one by one. Attached to each was a piece of cord, which, being pulled upon, brought to the surface a large cage, constructed somewhat on the plan of a modern eel or lobster pot. They were baited by pieces of dead fish, and from them the boy extracted half a score of eels and as many fish of different kinds. "Not a bad haul," he said, as he lowered the cages to the bottom again. "Now let us see what we have got in our pen." He paddled a short way along to a point where a little lane of water ran up through the rushes. This narrowed rapidly, and the lad got out from his boat into the water, as the coracle could proceed no further between the line of rushes. The water was knee deep and the bottom soft and oozy. At the end of the creek it narrowed until the rushes were but a foot apart. They were bent over here, as it would seem to a superficial observer naturally, but a close examination would show that those facing each other were tied together where they crossed, at a distance of a couple of feet above the water, forming a sort of tunnel. 2 feet farther on this ceased, and the rushes were succeeded by lines of strong osier withies, an inch or two apart, arched over and fastened together. At this point was a sort of hanging door, formed of rushes backed with osiers, and so arranged that at the slightest push from without the door lifted and enabled a wild fowl to pass under, but dropping behind it prevented its exit. The osier tunnel widened out to a sort of inverted basket 3 feet in diameter. On the surface of the creek floated some grain which had been scattered there the evening before as bait. The lad left the creek before he got to the narrower part, and, making a small circuit in the swamp, came down upon the pen. "Good!" he said. "I'm in luck today. Here are 3 fine ducks." Bending the yielding osiers aside, he drew out the ducks one by one, wrung their necks, and passing their heads through his girdle, made his way again to the coracle. Then he scattered another handful or two of grain in the water, sparingly near the mouth of the creek, but more thickly at the entrance to the trap, then paddled back again by the way he had come. Almost noiselessly, as he dipped the paddle in the water, the hound's quick ear had caught the sound, and he was standing at the edge of the swamp, wagging his tail in dignified welcome as his master stepped onto dry ground. "There, Wolf, what do you think of that? A good score of eels and fish, and 3 fine wild ducks. That means bones for you with your meal tonight, not to satisfy your hunger, you know, for they'd not be much use in that way, but to give a flavour to your supper. Now let us make the fire up and pluck the birds, for I warrant me that father and Egbert, if they return this evening, will be sharp set. There are the cakes to bake too, so you see there is work for the next hour or two." The sun had set now, and the flames dancing up as the boy threw an armful of dry wood on the fire gave the hut a more cheerful appearance. For some time the lad busied himself with preparation for supper. The 3 ducks were plucked in readiness for putting over the fire should they be required. Cakes of coarse rye flour were made and placed in the red ashes of the fire, and then the lad threw himself down by the side of the dog. "No, Wolf, it's no use your looking at those ducks. I'm not going to roast them if no one comes. I've got half of one left for dinner." After sitting quiet for half an hour, the dog suddenly raised himself into a sitting position, with ears erect and muzzle pointing toward the door. Then he gave a low whine. His tail began to beat the ground rapidly. "What, do you hear them, old fellow?" the boy said, leaping to his feet. "I wish my ears were as sharp as yours, Wolf. There'd be no fear then of being caught asleep. Come on, old boy, let us go and meet them." It was some minutes after he reached the edge of the swamp before the boy could hear the sounds which the quick ears of the hound had detected. Then he heard a faint splashing sound, and a minute or two later 2 figures were seen wading through the water. "Welcome back, father!" the lad cried. "I was beginning to be anxious about you, for here we are at the end of the 4th day." "I did not name any hour, Edmund," the boy's father said as he stepped from the water, "but I own that I did not reckon upon being so late. But in truth Egbert and I missed our way in the windings of these swamps, and should not have been back tonight had we not luckily fallen upon a man fishing who was able to put us right. You got some supper, I hope, for Egbert and I are as hungry as wolves, for we had nothing since we started before sunrise." "I have plenty to eat, father, but you will have to wait till it is cooked, for it was no use putting it over the fire till I knew that you would return. But there is a good fire, and you will not have to wait long. And how has it fared with you, and what's the news?" "The news is bad, Edmund. The Danes are ever receiving reinforcements.